After years of estrangement following the mistake that got me kicked out at 17, I thought maybe my parents were finally ready to move forward. They invited me over for dinner, a rare olive branch after nearly a decade of silence. I thought maybe we'd talk, clear the air. But it turns out they had something else planned entirely. According to them, if I truly wanted their forgiveness, I needed to start financially supporting my younger sister's luxurious influencer lifestyle. Yes, seriously. Instead, I chose a different path. One they didn't see coming. And now, they won't stop calling. They're furious. They're threatening legal action. And I could really use some advice. I'm a 25-year-old woman, and just a few days ago, I did something that completely sabotaged my sister Kelly's dream of becoming an Instagram influencer. And now my family is losing their minds over it. To give some context, I haven't really been close with my family since I was a teenager. I was kicked out at 17 after making what they called a final mistake. Honestly, I was already on thin ice. Between the ages of 15 and 17, I spiraled. I got mixed up with the wrong people, stayed out late, partied, smoked, drank, you name it. My grades plummeted. I was barely sleeping, and I was constantly sneaking out. My parents found out about everything, of course. They tried to ground me, but it only made me more defiant. I thought I was untouchable. I thought I was being cool. Really, I was just a mess. Meanwhile, there was Kelly. She was 21 now, but back then, she was their golden child. She followed the rules, stayed out of trouble, and by comparison, looked like an angel. Never mind that she could be manipulative and self-centered. At least she wasn't breaking laws. So, the standard was low, and she met it. My parents tried every punishment they could think of, but I never changed. I was reckless and arrogant. Eventually, they gave up, and one mistake too many later, I was out of the house for good. They didn't tell anyone, of course. Couldn't have the neighbors thinking their daughter had turned into a delinquent. When I had just turned 17, I made one of the biggest mistakes of my life. My friends and I were out drinking one night, and in a haze of bad decisions and peer pressure, I agreed to a dare, vandalizing a parked police car. It was reckless, stupid, and completely not worth it. We got caught, of course. And just like that, I was sentenced to 6 months in juvie. That experience shook me. It forced me to take a hard look at who I was becoming. The people I called my friends, they bailed the second the consequences got real. I was left to face everything alone. It was a painful wake-up call. Realizing how far I'd spiraled just to feel accepted by people who didn't care about me in the first place. By the time I was released, though, my parents had already made up their minds. They didn't want me back. I understood their anger, but being kicked out the moment I came home still hit me hard. I'd already done my time. I was still a few months shy of turning 18, and just like that, I had no home. I didn't know where to go. Most of my extended family wanted nothing to do with me. My friends weren't an option, not after I realized how toxic they really were. That left only my grandparents. My maternal grandparents lived out of state, which wasn't realistic. My dad's parents lived in the suburbs, far from my school and everything I knew. But I didn't have a choice. I was too afraid to go to the police and report what my parents had done. After that first run-in with the law, I didn't want anything to do with cops. And honestly, being just a few months away from 18, I wasn't even sure if anything could be done about it. So I went to my paternal grandparents and asked for help. Thankfully, they took me in. But that didn't mean life got easier. They were strict, very strict. And while I probably needed structure at that point in my life, what I really craved was comfort, support, some kind of reassurance that I hadn't completely ruined everything. I missed my parents terribly. They hadn't written or visited me while I was locked up. I felt abandoned. And even though my grandparents gave me a place to sleep and food to eat, it was clear I was only there because they didn't want to see me homeless. I had to transfer high schools and repeat my senior year, since I'd missed too much time. I was already flunking most of my classes before juvie, and now I was even further behind. I had no friends, no one to lean on, just the cold reality of a life I'd built with bad choices and no support system. I sank into depression. I felt alone, unwanted, and overwhelmed. But I also knew I couldn't stay stuck there forever. So I worked. I worked harder than I ever had in my life. I managed to get into a decent college, Not Ivy League or anything, but it was solid, and I threw myself into the chance to rebuild my life. I took out student loans, worked part-time jobs, and gave it everything I had. When I graduated, one of the first things I did was thank my grandparents by starting to repay them for all the support they gave me when no one else would. I also got incredibly lucky. 2 years ago, I landed a job as a graphic designer at a well-established firm. I had discovered my passion for design during my senior year and realized that this was what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And not to sound arrogant, but I'm actually pretty good at it. I had worked hard, poured my soul into my portfolio, and applied to this company without expecting much. To my surprise, they hired me. I love the work, and getting paid well to do something I'm passionate about is a huge plus. I'm still young, but I've built a stable, independent life for myself, and I'm genuinely proud of how far I've come. But even with all that growth, there was always one thing that weighed on me: my broken relationship with my parents. It wasn't that I never tried. Over the years, I'd reached out multiple times, hoping to reconnect, but they never responded. I understood that I'd made a dumb mistake when I was 17, and I don't blame them for being upset. Still, cutting me off completely and kicking me out, it felt like an extreme reaction. I was a teenager. A stupid one, sure, but still just a kid. And even if they couldn't forgive me back then, part of me hoped that after I started getting my life together, they might at least want to talk. But they didn't. So eventually, I forced myself to let go of that hope and move on. That's why, when my mom messaged me out of nowhere on Instagram last week, it completely caught me off guard. She wrote that they wanted to reconnect, that it had been too long, and that the family missed me. She said they felt I'd been punished enough and asked if I'd be willing to come over for dinner and talk. I was over the moon. I didn't think twice before replying. I accepted right away. I thought maybe this was finally it. Maybe this was the moment I'd been waiting for all these years. A chance to be a part of the family again, to put the past behind us. I had no idea what was actually waiting for me, or that this invitation came with strings attached. All I saw in that moment was hope. I never imagined they might have a hidden agenda. The next evening, I went over to their place for dinner. Things seemed great at first. I brought flowers and chocolates, we shared a drink, and I told them all about my life and work. I even got a little emotional thanking them for reaching out. For a moment, I really believed the night was genuine. That maybe, just maybe, they missed me. But then dessert rolled around, and so did their real intentions. That's when they brought up Kelly's influencer journey. Apparently, she'd hit a wall. Her follower count had stalled at just under 10,000, and she couldn't seem to grow anymore. I listened, confused, unsure where this was heading. Then they dropped the bomb. Because I was doing well for myself, they wanted me to start financing Kelly's luxury lifestyle so she could appear successful on Instagram. Their plan? The classic fake it till you make it. Fancy vacations, designer clothes, expensive restaurants, all paid for by me, so she could build an illusion of a glamorous life and attract brand deals. My jaw nearly hit the table. That was the moment it all clicked. This was why they reached out. Not to reconnect, not to reconcile, but to use me. They didn't want to pay for Kelly's influencer fantasies themselves, or maybe they couldn't. But now that I had a stable income, I was suddenly good enough. Not as a daughter, but as an ATM. My mom even said that if I really wanted to prove I'd changed and make up for my teenage mistakes, this was my chance. I stayed composed, smiled, said I'd think about it. I finished dessert and left like everything was fine. But inside, I was livid. As soon as I got home, I wrote a furious post laying everything out. I didn't hold back. I tagged Kelly. I tagged my parents. I made my account public and posted it all. Let the world see the truth. After posting my message, I forwarded it to as many people as I could, asking them to share it further. It didn't take long. Within a couple of hours, Kelly was blowing up my phone, exactly as I expected. She was furious, asking if I'd lost my mind and accusing me of trying to ruin her life and career. She demanded I delete the post immediately. I didn't. Instead, I blocked her number and went to bed, letting her spend the night stewing in her own mess. When I woke up the next morning, I found dozens of messages. mostly from people who knew Kelly personally but had never liked her. They were thanking me, congratulating me even, for calling her out. Apparently, the post had started gaining traction, and her follower count was dropping fast. She'd started with around 10,000 followers, not huge, but enough to matter to someone building a brand. By the time I checked that morning, she was down to 9,000. That was just the beginning. Almost a week has passed, and I still haven't taken the post down. Her follower count is hovering around 7,000 now, meaning she's lost nearly 3,000 people in just a few days. And she is absolutely spiraling. My parents aren't exactly thrilled either. They think I took things too far, that it was uncalled for. According to them, a lot of the people who've been sharing my post were already jealous of Kelly when her Instagram started gaining traction. They claim these girls from her high school and old friend groups were just waiting for something to drag her down, and my post gave them the perfect excuse. Maybe that's true. Maybe people were looking for a reason to turn on her. But honestly, I think there's more to it than just jealousy. Now, the situation has escalated. Kelly and her family have been sending me messages nonstop, demanding that I take the post down. So far, I've ignored them. But a couple of hours ago, they sent me a screenshot of a conversation they had with one of my dad's friends, who happens to be a lawyer. They're threatening to sue me. That post has now become the battleground. I feel like taking it down would send the wrong message, that I'm scared or that I regret it. And I don't. But at the same time, I'm not stupid. If there's a real chance they can sue me for defamation or harassment or whatever they're cooking up, then I could be in serious trouble. And I really don't want that. I just don't know how far they can actually take this, or how much legal ground they really have. Beyond all that, I've been seriously questioning whether I'm doing the right thing. The way my parents and Kelly were talking about her whole Instagram influencer path, it was clear they had already decided this was going to be her future. Like this was it for her. So now I'm stuck wondering, am I destroying her career by exposing everything? Am I sabotaging something she's worked for? On top of that, there's the guilt. After all, it was my mistake that got me kicked out in the first place. I was 17, I was reckless, and I gave my parents a lot of grief. So part of me feels like I should just be grateful they're even talking to me again. But still, I can't shake the way they brought me back into their lives. They didn't call because they missed me. They didn't reach out because they wanted to make things right. They lured me in with the promise of forgiveness, only to drop the bombshell that what they really wanted was for me to fund Kelly's influencer lifestyle. They weren't honest. They weren't even subtle. And that's the part one can't get past. If they had been upfront with me from the beginning, maybe I could have respected that, even if I'd said no. But instead, they used my hope against me. My hope that maybe, after all these years, they were ready to forgive me. Turns out, their forgiveness had a price tag. That's what stings the most. And I don't even know if I'm allowed to feel hurt about that. So, am I the asshole for making a post calling out my sister and my parents? For potentially damaging her image as an influencer? And for those of you asking what I actually posted, here it is, word for word. Hi. A lot of you may not know this, but I've been estranged from my family for a few years. I got kicked out when I was 17, and honestly, I don't blame my parents for that. I was a troubled teen, I caused them a lot of stress and pain. I take full responsibility for that. But I've worked really hard to turn my life around since then. I put myself through college, landed a stable career, and tried more than once to reconnect with them. They never responded. I didn't push. I figured maybe, with time, they'd come around. And honestly, I thought maybe I deserved their silence. Then last week, my mom reached out of the blue. She said they wanted to reconnect. I was hopeful, genuinely excited. I thought maybe, just maybe, they were finally ready to let the past go. But the moment I got to their house, it became clear that this wasn't about forgiveness. It was about money. They wanted me to financially support my sister Kelly, so she could continue pretending she could afford the luxury lifestyle she flaunts on social media. She doesn't work. She doesn't make enough from influencing to sustain that image. But instead of dialing it back, they decided I should bankroll it all. They used me. They used my hope and trust to try and manipulate me into paying for their illusion. And honestly, that's just disgusting. So I'm here to say, the lifestyle you see on Kelly's account, It's a lie, a performance. It's not real. And I won't be part of selling that lie, especially not by paying for it. I didn't buy my parents' forgiveness, and I'm not buying into this facade. Not anymore. I had captioned the post with the truth, plain and simple, and paired it with an old family photo. Something that once held meaning, now just symbolic of the mess beneath the surface. Most of the responses were surprisingly supportive, strangers and old acquaintances alike telling me I did the right thing. Of course, Kelly's friends came after me in the comments, but I expected that. It didn't bother me. I hadn't lied. I didn't twist the narrative to paint myself as the victim. I even owned up to my past. I admitted I was a troubled teenager and that I probably gave my parents every reason to kick me out back then. But even with the truth on my side, things started to feel risky. A few people mentioned they couldn't sue me since everything I posted was true. But some of my friends pointed out that technically they could try, especially now that Kelly's follower count had taken a dip and her influencer career had stalled. They could try to make it look like I purposely sabotaged her income, and suddenly we're talking defamation territory. The worst part? It would be my word against theirs. There were no witnesses at that dinner. Just me, Kelly, and our parents. No recordings. And they were smart. The only messages I got after posting were vague. They just demanded I take the post down. No acknowledgement. No hint of guilt. No written evidence of what was said. And let's be real, my history wouldn't help me. A lawyer could easily paint me as the vengeful delinquent who never got over being kicked out. They'd bring up my juvie record, my rebellious past, and spin it into a story about a bitter older sister jealous of her successful little sibling. I knew how easy it would be for them to twist everything. So I did the practical thing. I deleted the post. Not because I was ashamed, not because I regretted saying the truth, but because I wasn't about to sink thousands into legal fees just to fight people who never cared about me in the first place. I unblocked them, messaged them directly, and said it was down. I made it clear, I want no more drama, no threats, no manipulations. That's it. As for my grandparents, I'm pretty sure they were the ones who told my parents I was doing well now. It all lines up. That's likely how this whole thing got started. I won't cut them off entirely, especially since I still owe them money I'm paying back bit by bit. But I won't be seeking out more contact, either. I'll keep things distant, civil, and guarded, just like I should have from the beginning. After I unblocked them and sent my final message, Kelly wasted no time responding. She fired back with a voice note, nearly a minute and a half of nonstop swearing. She accused me of being jealous and bitter, told me that taking the post down didn't mean anything because the damage was already done. According to her, losing those followers was entirely my fault, and I was lucky that our parents wanted to drop the whole thing. If it were up to her, she said, she'd make sure I paid for it. I could have ignored her. I probably should have. But just to be petty, I replied, well, I guess I should be grateful you can't afford to take me to court yourself. Lucky me, right? Then, before she had a chance to respond, I blocked her again. And that was that, or so I hoped. A week passed since I took the post down, and I thought the dust had settled. Then, a few days ago, something unexpected happened. One of my old acquaintances from high school reached out. She didn't follow me, so I was a bit surprised when she messaged me asking if I had deleted the post. I told her I'd archived it and switched my account back to private. Naturally, I was curious why she cared. She said she'd heard all the buzz about the post and wanted to read it for herself but had missed the window before I pulled it. She felt like she'd shown up late to the drama and was curious about what exactly had gone down. So I explained it to her, why I posted it, what happened afterward, and why I ultimately took it down. I figured if she had questions, then others probably did too. After all, I never really addressed the situation publicly once things escalated. That's when she told me something that caught my attention. She said the reason my post had spread like wildfire, and why Kelly's follower count took such a sharp nosedive, wasn't because people were jealous. It was resentment. Apparently, a lot of people had just been waiting for an excuse to take Kelly down a peg. My post gave them that opening. From what I gathered, Kelly had gotten unbearable after gaining a few thousand followers on Instagram. Last year, one of her photos went semi-viral, and after that, things started to change. She leaned into the influencer aesthetic, always chasing the most aesthetic angles, posing in luxury brand outfits, flaunting designer bags, and tagging expensive cafes and vacation spots. But it wasn't just the look. It was her attitude. She'd become dismissive, arrogant, and obsessed with clout. People who used to be friends with her felt like she'd turned into someone entirely different. So when that post of mine made the rounds, it wasn't envy that fueled it. It was a collective sigh of finally. And honestly, hearing that made things make a lot more sense. Some of the things she flaunted online were borrowed, others were rented, but obviously you can't tell that from just a photo. Kelly curated this illusion of a luxurious lifestyle, and, as we all know, social media eats that stuff up. That's how her follower count started climbing. She was consistent, too, constantly posting, and before long, she had gained 10,000 followers. But the more her account grew, the more her attitude changed. She started cutting off her friends one by one, treating them like they were beneath her. It was as if she'd truly started believing she was living the life she portrayed online, like she was some celebrity when, in reality, she was still living at home, hadn't held a single job since graduating, and wasn't contributing anything meaningful to her own so-called lifestyle. Naturally, that left a bitter taste in a lot of people's mouths. The resentment built quietly until I made that post. And when I did, her former friends shared it like wildfire. They made sure people finally saw the version of Kelly they knew. Someone fake, entitled, and shallow. Honestly, I'm not surprised. My parents told me the only reason the post had gotten so much traction was because Kelly had a bunch of jealous girls who were eager to tear her down. But I never bought that. I said it before, and I'll say it again, it wasn't jealousy. After talking to someone from our old school, I confirmed that everyone already knew what kind of person Kelly was. Sure, she was bratty even back then, but now? She doesn't even have the few loyal friends she once had. That part was interesting to hear. But even so, I'm still not putting the post back up. It's just not worth it. I know some people in the comments of my last update called me cowardly for taking it down, but I don't see it that way. I looked at the situation logically and made a call. I wasn't going to let it spiral into a legal battle because, make no mistake, if I hadn't taken that post down, Kelly would have convinced my parents to sue me for defamation. And here's the kicker. I wouldn't have been able to prove my side of the story. I have no physical evidence, no receipts. They, on the other hand, have leverage. Even though my juvenile record is sealed, everyone knows I was sent to detention when I was younger. That alone would be enough for them to paint me as some vengeful, bitter sibling out to ruin Kelly's image. And with nothing concrete to defend myself, I knew I'd lose. This wasn't about fear, it was about being smart. That said, I don't want people thinking that you can just get away with manipulating and deceiving others as long as you threaten legal action. So no, I'm not reposting the original, but I am going to share a public statement explaining why I took it down. Not because I care about how people see me, but because I don't want others thinking that silence equals guilt or weakness. Thankfully, this time I do have proof. I've saved the messages where I was threatened with legal action if I didn't remove the post. I'll be sharing a screenshot of that as part of my statement. Let them see what really happened. This chapter is over for me, but I want to make sure it ends on my terms. Like I mentioned in my last update, I ended up posting again earlier today. This time, I shared a screenshot of the message I had received, the one threatening legal action if I didn't take down my original post about Kelly and my parents. In the caption, I explained that this was the reason I chose to delete that post. I made it clear that I didn't take it down because I was backing down or admitting guilt, but because I didn't have concrete evidence to back everything up in a court of law. I couldn't afford the financial fallout, a settlement, a lawyer, all of it. So after thinking it over carefully, I decided it wasn't worth the risk. But I also emphasized that taking the post down wasn't an admission of defeat. I wanted people to know the real reason behind my decision, so they wouldn't jump to their own conclusions. Most importantly, I wanted to make one thing very clear. People shouldn't get away with saying or doing whatever they want, especially when it comes to manipulating others and avoiding accountability. That was it. I didn't drag it out. I didn't mention any names. I kept the tone calm and to the point, no drama, just facts. Honestly, I didn't expect this post to get nearly the same amount of attention as the original one. But surprisingly, it did. A lot of people saw it and responded. The The support in the comments was overwhelming. No one mentioned Kelly by name, but we all knew who it was about. And still, everyone was respectful, encouraging, and kind. As of now, it's been several hours since I posted, and I haven't heard a single word from Kelly or my parents. No threats, no angry texts. I'm guessing they've seen it by now, but maybe they realize there's nothing they can actually do about it. I didn't name them, I didn't accuse anyone outright, just explained my side of the story. And this time, I have nothing to worry about. Even if they wanted to make a fuss, I know I've been careful. I just needed to say my truth. And now I have. But you know what? I've said everything I needed to say. And at this point, I don't expect anything from my family anymore. Honestly, maybe I should have stopped expecting anything from them the day they kicked me out. I never really thought about it before, but there had to be a reason I turned out to be such a troubled kid. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to make excuses or play the victim. I fully accept that what I did back then was wrong, and I deserved the consequences. I take full responsibility for that. But still, I can't ignore the fact that my parents were never really present for me. Their attention, their energy, it was always about my sister. Kelly was the one they adored, the one who could do no wrong. And I guess, in a messed up way, that's part of why I started acting out. No, it wasn't the only way I could have handled things. I know that now. There were better ways to cope, better ways to ask for help. But I was young, I was angry, and honestly, I just didn't know how to deal with everything. So I made a lot of bad choices. And instead of trying to understand or guide me, my parents responded with anger and cruelty. Even after they found out what I was doing, they never approached me with care. They never tried to help me change. They just got mad. They told me I was a failure, that I was a disappointment, that they wished I'd never been born. And the comparisons never stopped. No matter how bad things got, they kept holding Kelly up as the gold standard, like waving a trophy in my face while I was drowning. That only made things worse, pushed me even further down the wrong path. I didn't talk about any of this before because, honestly, I didn't want it to come across like I was whining about how I'd been treated or trying to justify the choices I made. But now I think it needs to be said, because this was never just about a single mistake. This was about years of being overlooked, dismissed, and made to feel like I didn't matter. I've never spoken about this to anyone. It's always felt too personal, too raw. But putting it out there now, saying it out loud, it feels like I'm finally letting go of something I've carried for far too long. And you know what? I feel lighter. I don't think I want my family in my life anymore. Not now, not ever again. They made their choice a long time ago. And now I'm finally making mine.